Hello again, and welcome to week 4. This is year 3, week 4, day 1. We're continuing our way through the book of Genesis. Now, last time we read from chapter 12 about how God called Abram to leave his homeland and how he arrived in Canaan. The latter portion of chapter 12, which we did not read last week, but rather read last year in week 14, shows what happened when there was a famine in the land, and how Abram and his household went into Egypt, where Abram lied to Pharaoh about his wife and said that she was his sister, so that Pharaoh tried to take her as his own wife until the Lord sent sickness and plague upon his household to prevent this from happening. Pharaoh was not unreasonably irritated with Abram and gave Sarah back to him and sent him and his household away. So this is where we will pick up the story. So, this is the beginning of chapter 13. So Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him into the Negev. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold. He journeyed on by stages from the Negev as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place where he had made an altar at the first. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support both of them living together, for their possessions were so great that they could not live together. And there was strife between the herders of Abram's livestock and the herders of Lot's livestock. At that time the Canaanites and the Perizzites lived in the land. Then Abram said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herders and my herders, for we are kindred. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right, or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left." Lot looked about him, and saw that the plain of the Jordan was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all the plain of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the plain, and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the people of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, "Raise your eyes now, and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land that you see I will give to you and to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring also can be counted. Rise up, walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I will give it to you." So Abram moved his tent, and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. So we've been reading through this story of Abram, and seeing what he does, and not everything he does is perfect. That's kind of been clear, and this is sort of an important principle that we should talk about here. As we see these figures in the Bible, as we go through, even though we're reading about people who are praised as righteous, we need to be discerning. It is not automatic. It is not guaranteed. We cannot assume that everything they do is right. So, for instance, when Abram was in Egypt, was it right that he lied and told the Pharaoh that his wife was his sister? We don't get an explanation. We don't get an interpretation of this. The Bible doesn't come out and say, "And now what Abram did was very wrong, but God still cared for him." Nor does it say, "And now what Abram did was right because he was in a difficult situation, and telling the lie at least preserved his life." And what we'll see then is that the interpreters of the Bible will sometimes draw one lesson and sometimes the other. We need to be discerning and recognize that whatever else happened in that account, in that story, God preserved Abram. God was faithful to his promise, even though Abram failed. And we can see this same thing happening in our lives. We don't always make the right decisions, But God very rarely actually brings the full consequences of our mistakes, of our sins upon us. And when he does, it is for our correction, for our restoration. Anyway, that's my interpretation. It might be right, it might be wrong, it might depend on the circumstances. Now, in this passage that we read here, we see Abram with his nephew, Lot, and they don't have enough room, so they're coming into conflict. They're close relatives. They should be close friends, and yet there's not enough space for both of them to stay together without conflict. So Abram resolves the conflict by giving Lot the choice of whatever part of the land he prefers, and Abram says, and then I'll go to the other place. Whatever you don't choose, I will choose. And we see Lot, he takes full advantage. He looks and he sees, well, they're up in the mountains, but down on the plain, down near the river, there's fertile land. It's rich, it's wealthy, it's easy, and Lot goes there. Now, we're not necessarily told that Lot is wrong to make that decision, nor are we told that he's right. Lot just makes the rational, reasonable, the good business sense decision. Abram is the one who's a little bit of a doofus, we would say, from a, again, logical, rational business sense, because Abram chooses to give first choice to his junior, to his nephew, who really, Abram doesn't need to do that. He could claim seniority and choose what he wants. So we see two things about Abram here. First, he prizes peace. He wants to have a good and peaceful and loving relationship with his nephew. He is trying to avoid this conflict, trying to resolve this tension, and therefore he gives his nephew the first choice. The second point is that Abram really does trust God. He does not believe that he needs to be angling for his best advantage at every opportunity. He knows that God will fulfill the promise in his good time. And he also knows what that time will be, because we just saw fairly recently God tell him that his descendants would be slaves for, quite a long time. Actually, hang on. That's coming up here. Abram doesn't know that. So he simply trusts God. God says that he will give his descendants this land, and Abram says, well, then God will take care of it. And he lets Lot have the better portion. So that trust that Abram shows, even though he doesn't know much for certain at all, this is really important. So that's what we have here. In this passage, we see Abram making decisions and making them not necessarily on the basis of what is the best short-term business decision for his own prosperity. He's choosing the course that will make peace between him and his nephew. As it happens, he chooses the course that also keeps him preserved from the sin and the evil of the rich and wealthy cities of the plain, but that's what those consequences are. That will come up another time. For now, this is the end for day 1. God bless you. We'll see you on day 2.